Hey everyone, it's Twisty Fox, and so I just came home from North American Champs. While I was there, I got a chance to speak to Dan Smith, who is the WCA Executive Director, and I also got to speak to Abdullah Gulab, who is on the WCA Board of Directors. I spoke to both of them about the decision to remove clock, and I just wanted to recount the conversations that I had. So before I get into this, I want to mention two important things. Firstly, I want to thank them for actually speaking to me. I think it does say a lot if you're willing to speak to your community about it. I just approached them and they were willing to talk to me about it, so I think that says a lot. And secondly, if I've misrepresented their points and they're watching this, or someone who else is on the WCA board or anything similar knows that I'm saying something that's not correct, please let me know. I'm not trying to spread misinformation or rumors or gossip. I just want to recount the conversations that I had with them because I think the community would really like to hear this information. And from what I've shared so far, people are really interested in these points. So without further ado, let's get into it. So firstly, I had a conversation with Dan Smith, and this was pretty brief, but as I had been seeing online and hearing the community talk, everyone was pretty much pointing to Dan Smith being the big problem because he's the WCA Executive Director. So I first went up to him and talked to him, showed him my free clock shirt that Trace from my state was also wearing, and we both just took this funny selfie with him. It was a funny time, and he was a good sport about it. Then we talked about a few other little things. So he first mentioned, well, have you seen the survey results? And I told him, yeah, I saw that Five Blind was actually voted more than clock for the community. And I also saw that it was like kind of misleading where it was asking if an event was to be removed, what event would you like to be removed? And Dan Smith actually responded like, yeah, that's good feedback. He compared it to like if you were to ask someone if you had to eat Chinese food, what Chinese dish would you get? But what if you don't even like Chinese food? So he came up with that analogy, and I think that does encapsulate it pretty well. He also said that while there was a very vocal community of people who do want it removed, he said that a lot of messages he's received, I think he might have even said more of the private messages he's received are about people being happy that clock is being removed. So that was pretty much what I said with him. But then he was just kind of nudging me and hinting me like, hey, I know you're kind of talking to me, but why don't you talk about to the guy who actually had power in doing this, which is Abdullah Gulab. So Abdullah said that WCA board, all of them had to vote unanimously for clock to be removed, all 5 members. And he's on the board, so he voted for clock to be removed. So I talked to him. This was the main conversation. This is the meat and bones of what I had to say to these guys. And the first thing that Abdullah said that really stuck with me is that the real reason clock was removed is confidential, and that the publicly posted reasons are, sure, they're reasons, they're somewhat valid, but the real reason he could not tell me. And there could be a number of things. I'll speculate later on. I don't want to mix my speculation with what he actually said, but that's what he said. He also compared it to chess and says they kind of want to take cubing that direction. He also brought up the Olympics with that and how they're applying for cubing to be a competitive sport in the Olympics. So obviously the Olympics has a lot of different sports. I don't really follow it a whole lot, but I know like they've had hide and seek one year. But idea is that they are actually in talks with the WCA committee about this. In chess, I think that a lot of people who aren't even competitively into chess, myself, I don't follow that scene at all. I know how to play chess casually, but I don't keep up with the competitive side at all. And I know that like these chess tournaments get really big. There's a lot of publicity about it. Even sometimes I'll see a stream of like 2 top players playing it. And I think that, that's kind of what Abdullah's getting at there. Another thing that I thought was pretty interesting was when we were talking about it becoming like chess or the Olympics or something like that. There was someone nearby who was listening, and he kind of had like a aha moment where he was like, oh, that's why. And Abdullah pretty much was like, yeah, see, does it seem like such a bad decision now? And I thought that was pretty interesting. Again, I don't know what this confidential reason was, but I do think that was a pretty interesting thing that happened during the conversation. So I mentioned the idea that, well, if the WCA is not going to have clock, then, what if some other organization has clock? And we talked about how, in like China, they have these different organizations. And I think Philippines also had a different cubing organization that just held a big competition. And Abdullah argues that having competition for businesses is good. Like having, Apple put it against like Android phones, or like whatever comparison you want to make, Xbox and PlayStation. Having competitions in business is good, but he argues that competition within organizations is bad. So honestly, I don't really follow a lot of sports. Again, I'm just mostly repeating what he had to say to me, but he pointed up things like boxing, and how I think he said for boxing, 4 different organizations. You have to go against all of them, and then once you finally win in all those organizations, that's when you're finally the world championship. He doesn't like the idea of that happening in cubing. He wants the community to be just WCA, World Cube Association, as it says in the name. And then within there, people can obviously go to different competitions around the world. Another big thing that kept coming back, was kind of a through line of our conversation, is that cubing is getting more and more big name sponsors, and how this is going to become more a part of it. So at North American Championship, I definitely saw that there was a lot of talking about the cubicle, a lot of talking about Rubik's, and even for people who weren't like those companies that didn't sponsor it, you obviously see a lot of like the Speedcube Shop hoodies and different things like that. So he's definitely aware that this is something, and I think this might be a little bit speculation, but he definitely is, veering on the side of wanting to appeal to sponsors, because these big competitions, I'm imagining they're getting more and more expensive. I've not looked at how much they cost, but the fact is that they are getting more expensive, and they need to have more sponsors as part of it for sure. So Trace also asked him about Clock's one event, but what about these other events like FMC or Big Blinds? And he pretty much was like, yeah, we need to do something about those too. He, I guess, kind of saw Clock as being the biggest issue, the number one priority of what needs to be removed, but he wants to do something about those. So he wasn't clear if he wanted them to be removed or not appear in big competitions or be in a lower tier in big competitions, but Abdullah at least is on the page of where we want those bigger events, those less spectator friendly, in quotes, events, to not be as big of a part of it. One other thing that I don't think I have written down here that I think has been talked about like in the official announcements is about the spectator friendliness. And this really comes down to the fact that on a clock, everything needs to be pointed at 12 o'clock. There's 2 sides of it. So even if you could perfectly film like from above always, or I know some clocks always, are going to hold it more at a vertical angle to where it's hard to see. Even if you can get the perfect camera angle, there still is the other side. How are you going to know what the other side is for clock? It's difficult to film. And I do think there is something to that. I know whenever I've described clock to people that are not cubers, they can understand it after I describe it. But for a Rubik's Cube, or even if I describe like a different puzzle or show them a different puzzle, it's instantly clear how it works. So this was the point that he brought up about it being not spectator friendly. I personally think when I watched Clock Finals at North American Champs, maybe it's because that's the event that I'm most passionate for, but I thought that was like probably the second best final next to 3x3. And even then, Clock Final went by really snappy 3x3 final. As someone who doesn't really keep up with a lot of the fast cubers these days, it dragged on a little bit, not in a bad way, but it took its time with people going in pairs of 2. But the Clock Final was super hype, and I know it got like, I don't want to say the wrong number, but I'm pretty sure it had like 100 more views on average, like from like when it happened, and then like immediately just dropped off. So I think that's one thing. But again, Abdullah's point is about the puzzle, the nature of the puzzle itself. This also reminds me of another thing that he said. I had to pause just to fully think about it. I mentioned about like, okay, well, for clock, what's the harm in just taking clock out of big competitions? Just like not having it there at all, not tiering, not having a lower, just like literally removing it. Then if people want to add local competitions, let them have it at local competitions. What he argued is that if people are having it at local competitions, at the end of the day, that still is going to be what people are going in expecting. Big competitions only happen like there's one North American champ every 2 years, so they definitely don't happen as much. And if clock is still at these smaller competitions, then when people think of cubing, they're still going to see clock. So then my counter argument to that was like, well, if people are hosting comps at local competitions, then clearly they want to have clock. What's the harm in that? And the point that Abdullah brought up is that, well, the community does not always know what's best for it. And I think to a point, this is true, that as a community, we just we can see perspectives of what we want to do. At the end of the day, we are not executives. Now, in terms of clock, I disagree with this. In general, I do think it makes sense. So one point that I've heard about, and I've never played Destiny, but I've heard people talk about for Destiny 1, it had all these things that people would complain about. And then for Destiny 2, they fixed all those issues. But those issues were the things that kept people coming back to it. And so the community did not know what's best. And I think that can be true in a bottle. Abdullah is arguing that this is true in the case of clock, where people think they want clock, and they're talking about how they like clock, but they don't know what's best for it. He also mentioned how the community is always going to have a bias for adding events and not removing events. So personally, I'm super excited about FTO being added. But in terms of just adding a random event, like, I would probably be excited for almost any event to be added. I mean, short of it being like a 2x2x3 or something, like, I would be hyped for anything. Does this mean that adding new events is always the best thing? No, it does not. It can clutter up the event list. And at the end of the day, I'm not the one organizing these big competitions. So I do think he has a point there where community is going to trend to want to add events and keep events. Well, the WC does have to counteract that. Again, in terms of clock, I do disagree with this. But there's definitely one thing he brought up. Another thing that I think Trace brought up this point is about, well, why finally remove clock when it's getting good? People are using 7 Simul. Good hardware is coming out. No one would have been upset in 2018. Personally, I would have been upset in 2018, but I just would have, come across and kind of been just like a whiny, 14-year-old or whatever. Instead, people, they're removing it now. And one thing that he's talked about is, this is a decision that they've been talking about for years. It's just been hard to get off the ground, especially with there being a lot of other WCA controversies, such as with the sliding controversy, like Vietnam, and all these other little controversies. And so clock kind of got pushed to the wayside. But now that they finally have a chance, they're doing it, trying to just rip off the Band-Aid. One other thing, and I think this is the final point that I have written down, is that he mentioned that with cubing growing as the way that it is, he could see it becoming big enough to the point where he would lose his own role as being on a board. And he's okay with that. He talks about how he wants to grow cubing to a point where people who have more experience with running big events can actually take over for him. So he's not trying to do this to be in here for the long game. He's not trying to win a popularity contest. He is trying to grow the WCA in the way that he sees fit, that the way he sees will get it bigger. So at the end of the conversation, he also said that the decision for clock to be removed is not 100% confirmed yet, is what they've announced, of course, but the community has responded and they are taking this into account as they think about what they want to do next. So I do want to say, make sure you keep talking about how you want clock to be freed, keep signing the petition, spreading the word politely, and not in a mean way, expressing your opinions about this matter, because it definitely does still matter a lot. And yeah, anyone else has any other thoughts based upon this, or if you have any other information, please let me know. So Abdullah and Dan, and I think 4 out of the 5 board members are going to be at Euros next week. So if you're going to be there, feel free to talk to him. If you're able to record, just so we have something that's in concrete of him saying it, I think that would be great. I didn't ask to record Abdullah. Dan did not want to be recorded. If he's willing to do interview that covers these points, I think that would be great. I don't want this to be the only form of this information out there on the internet. But while I seem to be one of the only people who did speak to him about these particular points, I did want to just make a video covering them and talking about some of the nuance. So anyways, I think that's about it for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or anything else. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.